India has emerged at the world stage. It is just the first day of the G20 Summit, and New Delhi has done what was being seen as a challenge till just yesterday. A summit declaration has been released with 100% consensus from all member nations. It has 83 paragraphs in total, and it is the first declaration without any footnotes. So how did New Delhi achieve this? Well, it was not an easy task to begin with. In all ministerial meetings leading up to this, no joint statements were issued by the members. There were always too many differences to work through. But now exists a 37-page document where countries with polar opposite views have come on the same table. One of the most contentious issues has been the Russia-Ukraine war and the language surrounding it. The declaration does not mention Russia even once, but the Indian delegation has crafted two things. One, it has highlighted the immense human suffering due to the war, and second, urged for resolution to end the war and not fan it further. The IMF has said that 80% of growth is going to come from emerging markets. So if countries like India are going to drive future growth, then their presence becomes more of a necessity than a formality. There has been a visible push for the global south. The African Union is a part of the G20 because of India's push for the move. After all, 6 of the 12 fastest growing countries are from Africa. India finds itself at the center of global trade discussions. The G20 accounts for 85% of the global GDP, 75% of world trade, and 2/3 of the global population. India has leveraged its position to attract investments. The G20 presidency keeps changing each year. That's been the norm since 2008. When the baton was passed last year, New Delhi was quick to share its vision of how no one should be left behind. Up next, Brazil will be handed over the presidency for 2024. And world leaders hope that Brazil is able to extend India's vision of one world, one family. And for more analysis, we are now being joined by our special guest of the hour, former Indian diplomat Navdeep Singh Suri. Ambassador, thanks for joining us on WION at this hour.
Pleasure.
Ambassador, this is a huge diplomatic win for India. Consensus, 100% consensus reached despite concerns about the same just yesterday. What does this say about Prime Minister Modi's diplomatic feat?
I think it's truly remarkable that we managed to achieve this, and it's not a 20th over victory, but with time to spare, with overs to spare. I think it's a combination of two things. Some very heavy lifting by the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, the NSA, the Foreign Secretary and their team at the top, along with Amitabh Kant as the Sherpa, but also some very skillful drafting by our diplomats, using the language to bridge the divide, so that when you're trying to build a consensus, you need to make sure that there are no explicit winners and losers. And I think, on the contentious issue of Ukraine, and that's what they've managed to somehow do, which is that there's no mention of Russia, which means that Russia was not going to veto the document. But there's pretty strong language about Russian action in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
The Prime Minister's reiteration that this is not an era of war, the importance of respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty and not violating it through the use of force, the very strong message about threats against using nuclear weapons, the damage impacts of the Ukraine war on developing countries. So I think they've managed to say a lot about Ukraine, for example, without naming Russia, and that gives enough for EU and the US to support it, and for Russia not to oppose it. And I think that's the kind of skill that diplomats bring to the table, and I'm delighted. Hats off to my erstwhile colleagues in the Ministry of External Affairs who pulled this off, along with the top-level push where Prime Minister was able to almost recruit the US and other leaders to say upfront that they will work with India to make this summit a success.
Right, absolutely. I think it's a proud moment indeed for India at large. I want to delve a little bit further into one statement made by you that in diplomacy there should be no explicit winners or losers. And the language here has been crucial. We know that Russia has not been mentioned as an aggressor, but India has mentioned Ukraine and achieved 100% consensus. There was a lot of concern that with the Russia-Ukraine war dominating the agenda and yet Russia not being present, it may become a roadblock in achieving consensus. What does this say about India's language and it becoming the voice of the global South?
Well, those who have served in our mission in New York or in Geneva will tell you that in the diplomatic community around the world, there's a great deal of respect for the drafting skill of Indian diplomats, their ability to pull a rabbit out of a hat. When you seem to be at an impasse, they will come up with a formulation that somehow bridges the divide between two opposing sides. And we've done it over the years. We've had a lot of practice with it. And I think all of those skills have been put to use here to produce a consensus that was evading us during the earlier ministerial and working group meetings. But I do want to say that, let's not get absolutely distracted by the Ukraine matter, because there's so much else that this summit has achieved. And I think it's really important to highlight those achievements also, even though, the Western media will remain fixated on Ukraine.
Ambassador, that actually brings me to my next question. Let's talk about the African Union. It's become a G20 member. India has been batting for it. Would you call this a successful G20? India has achieved whatever it set out to do.
I think so. We've achieved several major things. Certainly, African Union coming to the high table, speaking with their own voice, articulating their own concerns, not just there as a supplicant or a recipient, but as an equal member on the table, is a very big deal. And I'm delighted that, again, we were able to push hard and build a consensus around it. And it is delightful to see a very small country like Comoros, which happens to currently occupy the chair of the African Union, to be embraced by the Prime Minister and welcomed to the G20 plus one now as the latest member. And I think it also speaks about our desire to have a more just and equal word. If you can have the European Union present there as a permanent member, then why not the African Union?
Right. Ambassador, the people who are watching us often see talking heads and they want to know what has actually come out of this G20 summit. So I want to talk about this railway project that was announced earlier today by Prime Minister Modi and the US President Joe Biden. Lots of infrastructure, trade, and economic corridor that essentially the United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, India and EU have signed. The stakeholders are big. Tell us more about that achievement.
So I've actually written 2 papers about this in the past. This really started off during the I2U2, the India, Israel, US, UAE conversations. And there was a great deal of emphasis at that time on strategic connectivity through West Asia. And nobody was very clear what this could mean, but there was some speculation. Are we talking about reviving old trade links that, when spices used to be shipped and housed from the west coast of India, from Malabar to the Gulf, and then on camels onwards to Egypt and beyond? I think what we have seen today is in a sense the culmination of work that has happened over the last year and a half, including that very important meeting of the 4 national security advisors. Don't forget that Mr. Ajit Doval met his counterparts from US, from UAE, and from Saudi Arabia in May to give some definition to this. What it means for us in real terms is today our only route to export to Europe is via the Suez Canal. And it typically takes a ship leaving from Nhava Sheva or Kandla 17 to 18 days to reach the southernmost port in Europe, which is Piraeus in Greece. If you have a rail connectivity, just visualize that a ship leaves from Kandla or Mumbai for Jebel Ali in Dubai. And from there, the containers get put on a railway line And that railway line through UAE goes into Saudi Arabia, into Jordan, into Israel. And from Haifa port, again, the containers are shipped on to Piraeus in Greece and then onto the European rail network. You can reduce the transshipment time by 40%. Right now, it takes 17 to 80 days. You could actually do the journey in 10 days. And that means a lot of savings, a lot of benefits for exporters. As we are trying to reorder supply chains around the world and reduce our dependence on China, it means that we are creating alternatives. We are not going to be 100% dependent on the Suez Canal, and we are certainly creating an alternative to the Chinese Belt and Road initiatives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ambassador, thank you so much for those insights. And one of your statements that will stay with me is the Indian diplomat's skill of negotiation and being able to pull out a rabbit out of a hat. Thanks for joining us on WION World is One.
Pleasure.
WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.